You're listening to Phenomenology Club Radio. Hello all, and welcome back to Phenomenology Club. I am Buttress, your Italian-American benevolent host, hailing to you from the forests of New Jerusalem. How are y'all doing out there? How are we feeling? What are today's anxieties? I'll tell you what my anxiety is today. I have completely convinced myself yet again that I'm developing a goiter. I have this horrible fear of developing a goiter ever since I learned what a goiter was, really. Well, no, not really, actually. I knew what a goiter was a long time ago. But then I found out I have thyroid disease, Hashimoto's to be exact. No, I'm not a weeb. I just happen to have a Japanese named disease, okay? And apparently people with this condition, like myself, are at increased risk of developing goiters. And for those of you who don't know, a goiter is when your thyroid, which is the butterfly-shaped gland in your neck, you could see it when you're swallowing, your thyroid becomes enlarged and it looks like you have fucking a giant thing on your fucking neck. And it's like, it can be very difficult to remove. And I'm sorry, this is vain. This is very vain. I don't care. I would rather die than have a goiter. Just kill me at that point. I mean, if you can't remove it. But like, no fucking way. I'm not doing life with a goiter. That's horrible. And I don't have health insurance. I live in the United States of Triple K fucking America. Bethany with a goiter is not a possibility, okay? What the fuck is a goiter? Google it. Dree went to urgent care today. For what? Are you alright? Andrew says, doing okay. Had a generally unlucky day, but otherwise it was okay. Sounds like Dree had an unlucky day too. Why was your day unlucky, Andrew? What's happening? Andrew says, marry me, Bethany. I'm gay, but I have great insurance. I would love to marry a gay man for health insurance. Let's do it. Is that considered fraudulent, actually? Because, you know, like, it's considered fraud. I think it's considered a federal crime, for example, if you marry somebody expressly with the purpose of, like, helping them get citizenship, you know? Not that I've Googled that. But, if that's illegal, then is it also illegal to marry someone, like, knowing they're gay for health insurance? I mean, if it is, then we're screwed because I'm talking about it right now publicly. They could just submit this as evidence. Someone will send a transcript of this to the FBI and then we're done for, Andrew. God, I ruined it. Why did I have to read that comment out loud? Fuck it. Ryan says, technically, of course you would know, you little criminal. Diamonds on my goiter neck, says Zensei. Oh God. Yeah, I guess if I get a goiter, I can just be like the person with a goiter and just make it my thing. Make it my new thing. Andrew says it's not illegal. Just Googled it. Okay, perfect, Andrew. Let me know when you'd like to get married. I'm ready for that health insurance so I could go make sure I don't develop a goiter. Anyway, how's everyone doing out there in the big old world besides goiter anxieties? I see people are... Is that a new feature on YouTube? People are like posting little smiley faces that are floating up like happens on Instagram. I've never seen that before. Is this a new feature, YouTube? How cute. How cute. Oh, Andrew says, I'm up for a promotion, so obviously my luck has to balance out and make me unlucky today. God, don't you hate how that happens? You know, I feel like that happened to me recently. Kind of. Well, it always happens. I mean, when it rains, it pours, right? That's not even related to what you just said, but... It's always like things are going so good, then all of a sudden everything is like, shit is like hitting the fucking fan. I had that recently. It was just horrible. I've been trying to finish this Brutus Part 2 video, which I finally finished. Go like and subscribe. Get those views up. I finally finished it, and near the last week when I was like ready, I like only had one more week and I was feeling good. I'm like, hell yeah, this video, it's gonna be done. My fucking Highlander... 2003 Highlander, rest in peace, fucking died on the side of the road when I was en route to my friend's house, whose house I've been editing at, because my computer can't handle the fucking graphics that were involved in doing Brutus Part 2. And it was just, I had this like crazy week, like no car. My dear friend picked me up every day and drove me to his house to edit. Isn't that so nice? I don't want to dox like where both of us live. Phenomenology Club members know who it is. There's only members in here, really. I didn't promote this live stream. I'm not in the mood. I've been getting more attention because of the video after returning from like a 5-year hiatus, and I'm not ready to promote Phenomenology Club, because I remember back in the day when we first started the club, every time I would like post a music video or something, like we get like an influx of new members, which is fine, but you know how it goes in Phenomenology Club. Those of you who have been here for a while, new people show up, they want to discourse, they want to fight. I don't want to fight. I'm old. I have stuff to do. I'm out of my fighting online era. I just want to have pleasant, peaceful discourse, and that's it. So, didn't promote this. I don't want new people right now. And if you're new, you better be fucking nice and don't fight with us. Period. Oh, yeah, rest in peace to the Highlander. I can't stand cars. I really can't stand cars. They're so hard to understand. I'm thinking about leasing a vehicle now. Actually, my dear mother, I don't deserve this woman. She gave me her old car. Well, the car she was using, because she inherited a car from somebody else, also an old car, that, like the Highlander, had been sitting for months. So I'm concerned because, if there's one thing I learned from the Highlander, it's that when people say the worst thing for a car is to sit for a long period of time doing nothing, that's the worst thing for a car. This is absolutely true. Don't buy a car that has been doing nothing but sit around for months or years or whatever. Because, yeah, this thing, I went and got it checked out, the Highlander, everything seemed fine. They're like, oh, yeah, you're good to go. Then as soon as you start driving it, it just starts falling apart. Every part just keeps fucking falling apart. I just couldn't take it anymore. I put a lot of money into the thing because the car was only $1,000. But then eventually I was just like, man, fuck it. I'm not spending any more money on this thing. And I haven't had any money. I'm so broke right now. Everything went wrong at the same time, but you know what? Video's out, drinking coffee, developing a goiter, we're good. Battery dies at minimum. Yeah, period. But anyway, speaking of my new video being done, I thought that in honor of the new video being done, which, by the way, is a Phenomenology Club production, everybody in the video is a member of Phenomenology Club. Isn't that amazing? Except for Caesar. He's my dear friend, but he's not a member of Phenomenology Club. Everybody in the video is from the club, and I met through the club. Isn't that so cute? Give it up for the club. Look at us building real-world friendships and collaborative friendships at that. We truly are a club of little collaborators. Love that for us. But anyway, speaking of that, I wanted to talk about a theme relevant to the story of Brutus because I have nothing else to talk about at the moment. I can't think about anything. I was like, let's fucking do a Brutus themed stream and talk about utilitarianism. Now, I am not philosophically trained. I did take a handful of philosophy courses in college, as some of you know, but I don't know. I couldn't tell you the first fucking thing about scholarly philosophy, really, and the history of something like utilitarianism, but the concept is pretty simple, and that's what we're going to talk about together because we can all grasp it. Utilitarianism is essentially the concept that all morality and ethical codes should aim at the greater good, the good for the majority of people, or the good of the group over the individual. Now, what do y'all think about that? Do you consider yourself utilitarian in your approach to general ideas about morality and ethics? And why or why not? The reason that this is relevant to a story like the story of Brutus, at least Shakespeare's Brutus, who knows what the guy was like in real life, but in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the character of Brutus is this very troubled man who feels very much like Caesar, his dear friend and mentor, has become tyrannical. He loves this man very much, Caesar, Julius Caesar. He considers him a close friend and almost like family, but at the same time, he feels as if Caesar's behavior as leader of Rome is compromising the sanctity and the goodness of Rome, and believes that for this reason, sadly, he must kill his friend. Not out of resentment or malice towards Caesar, but out of the good of Rome, committing an act such as murder for the good of other people. What do we think about this? I love the kind of moral ambiguity that surrounds this story, and I love moral ambiguity, period, especially as it relates to dramatic tragedies from years of old. I mean, it's just so fun grappling with what the right thing to do is. Zensei says, that's too complex. What is too complex, Zensei? Do you think that... Well, Andrew says, I couldn't do it if I was Brutus. Zensei, would you kill somebody if you thought that it was for the good of everybody? And also, is something like this even quantifiable? And also, does anybody truly believe that the good of the individual trumps the good of the group? I mean, I think about what kind of political discourse exists in our current landscape. Landscape's my favorite word, look it up. What kind of discourse happens? And even the people who are the most pro-individualistic always say things like, let people do what they want as long as it's not hurting anybody, as long as it's not hurting others. So even the people, I think, who put the individual on a pedestal above everybody else, people like liberal feminists, aka choice feminists, and people like libertarians, a lot of right-wing people, kind of live by this mantra, do what's right for you, just don't harm others. Even these people still, who promote individualism, have this kind of addendum that individualism is only good insofar as it does not harm the group. I can't think of any sort of political group that actually believes in putting the good of the individual over the good of the majority. I think where these ideas become really complicated is when you're trying to think about, well, what is good for the group? And when does the rights of the individual impede on the rights of the group? And also, how do you know what is good for the group? Especially when, and we've talked about this many times in here before, especially when we're making decisions about what we think is good for anything, oftentimes this is a completely hypothetical projection, you know. To bring up one of the most famous examples of something often used in discussions about utilitarianism, the trolley experiment. Would you pull the lever and kill this one person that you happen upon and tied up on these train tracks for no reason? Or do you let the trolley, continue on its regular route and kill 3 people? And I think impulsively a lot of people say, well, I suppose I would pull the lever and murder the individual who unfortunately was exposed to me here. It's unfortunate that I stumbled up. This guy would have been fine had I not showed up and pulled the lever, because ultimately it's easy to make a claim that, you know, the more people survive this unfortunate incident, the better. But then you start running into questions of like, well, who are these people? Who are the 3 people tied up on the tracks below, and who is the 1 person above? Maybe the 1 person above is going to cure cancer. Maybe he's the president. Maybe he's the nicest guy in the world. Maybe the 3 people are pedophiles and terrorists and make bad art. You know, how do we even calculate something like what is good for the majority of people? Is something like saying, well, the more people alive, the better? Is that good enough? Quantity over quality? Can the group be benefited by it being smaller in quantity? This is a huge debate going on right now with things like talking about the population of our Earth, which has never been so large as it is right now. Didn't we just hit 9 billion? Hold on, I don't want to spread misinformation. Let me check. Population of the Earth. I did see that India finally surpassed China in population. Congratulations, India. Gotta give it up. No matter if I think that's a little too many people, I'm happy for them. Oh, 7.8 billion. Okay, I was so wrong. Either way, the population has been steadily increasing for quite some time now. It's showing no real signs of slowing, though I have seen it speculated that the population is slowing a bit, so that's good. Good in the sense that, I've said this many times, it's not just about the distribution of resources. People always shut down overpopulation arguments immediately because they want to be like, well, there's resources enough for everybody. First of all, there isn't. And it's not because there wasn't an abundance of a natural resource like water. It's because our disgusting, technophile, industrial civilization has made it so that all of our natural resources are completely corrupted and polluted by things like microplastic. As far as I'm concerned, there's no more clean water, period. So I guess it doesn't matter how many fucking people are drinking it, because it's not even clean anymore. It's all laden with fucking microplastics, and we're all getting fucking autoimmune thyroid diseases because of the plastics in the fucking water. Can I get an amen? What was I saying? I just went on a fucking rant. Quantity over quality. Oh, right. This is very relevant, the idea of more people, less people. I mean, can we say that it is always morally better that there are more people alive than less people? I mean, this is kind of the argument a lot of people present for the trolley problem. I'm going to kill the one person, so sorry, but I'm going to kill the one person because it is better for more people to survive. But then again, we get into discussions like, who are these people? What do they do? Is it truly better for the world to have 3 people instead of 1 people without even considering who these people are? Let me look at the comments really quick. Zensei says, should you tell someone the truth if it'll likely destroy them? What's the relevance to this conversation, Zensei? I'm intrigued. Andrew says, I relate more with deontology and virtue ethics than utilitarianism as far as moral philosophy. Interesting. What exactly is deontology? Deontology is an ethical theory that says actions are good or bad according to a clear set of rules. Its name comes from the Greek word deon, meaning duty. Actions that align with these rules are ethical, while actions that don't aren't. That's very interesting. So, I see. Okay, so here's an example. I'm looking at Google, by the way. I didn't just pull that out of my ass if you can't hear me typing. Deontology states that an act that is not good morally can lead to something good, such as shooting the intruder, in parentheses, killing is wrong, to protect your family, in parentheses, protecting them is right. But, okay, this is part of my concern, too, with, with, like, this kind of a philosophical approach to morality. It's like, when we're talking about hypothetical outcomes, can we, first of all, we can't know the consequences of any action. It is completely hypothetical. Secondly, what if something like, what if you kill with bad intentions leading to a good outcome, Like, let's say some murderer is out here stalking the streets, just dying to commit his next kill, and he happens upon some guy and kills him just out of cold blood. He just wants to. Then we found out that the person he murdered in cold blood is actually some type of horrible offending pedophile. Now, is the fact that this guy who was stalking the streets that just happened to murder a pedophile, not because he knew he was a pedophile, but he just wanted to kill someone, is now what he did morally good, something like that? That's kind of interesting. What would what would someone who describes the deontology say about that one? Andrew says, virtue ethics is would a good person do this, and deontology is does this follow the rules? Well, I can relate to that, Andrew. I mean, I've often said that I think morality simply is, and ethics simply is, or at least should be, a code of conduct relating to, or a code of conduct oriented towards the health and well-being of humanity, the human species, as dictated by biology, meaning that the other animals are technically excluded from this moral code and, in a sense, have their own relative moralities, though they don't really, because they don't have symbolic language like we do. We're really the only species with an articulated morality, and morality is really just an articulation made possible with language. So technically the other animals don't have morality, but I would argue that all of the rules that we've created as far as moral code of conduct goes are predicated on our human biology. Things like the experience of empathy for other human beings that takes priority over empathy for other animals like mosquitoes, or empathy for bears. We do have empathy for the bear, but I would argue we have greater empathy for the human. And I would argue that there is some sort of a biological imperative there that is based in the human will to survive and promote our own species. Just like the bear is going to put itself above humans and put its cubs above humans and put another bear potentially above humans. So I think that morality is essentially a philosophy that we've articulated that describes something that is real at baseline. Also, the experience of human emotion, experiences like jealousy, which I would argue is an evolutionary phenomena birthed out of things like sexual competition. Code of conduct as it relates to things like envy and jealousy are still, this is still an articulation of like baseline human natural impulses, quote unquote. Quote unquote. I'm quote unquoting natural, not impulses. You know what I'm saying? Zensei says, i.e., this is about what you said before about telling someone the truth even if it would break them. I.e., telling someone they've been cheated on, leading to potentially breaking up a family. I won't be saying anything, but that's a good example. Would you tell someone they've been cheated on knowing that their family would break up? Now that's a hard one. I have been put in the uncomfortable situation of knowing that a friend is cheating on their partner, who I'm also friends with. And I did not like being in that situation. I've been put in it a few times, actually. I don't like being put in that situation. Please don't cheat in front of me. I don't like it. But in this case, these people didn't have family, so thankfully I wasn't really, I didn't have any sort of moral crisis about it. But that is a very interesting example. I can see how it relates to this discussion, kind of. Andrew says, utilitarians would not break up the family. You think so? Because I was actually just going to ask you, Andrew, what is really the difference between deontology? I mean, can't deontology be utilitarian? I mean, what ultimately are these guidelines for morality oriented towards? Like, I would say, personally, I think utilitarianism, I think like pretty much all approaches to morality are utilitarian. I can't think of one code, a human code of morality in any sort of culture or political philosophy that aims at the good of the individual over the good of the group. The good of the group, I would argue, is always the thing that all political philosophies and moral codes of conduct are oriented towards. I wouldn't say that based on what we've just read and discussed that deontology is like not utilitarian. It's kind of yeah, no, I don't think so. Zensei says, for the greater good of society, we need the illusion of a functioning, wholesome family to last. Now, I definitely disagree with that one. I think that the nuclear family is falling apart precisely because society is slowly coming into the knowledge that the nuclear family is sort of this very economically isolating place historically for women especially, where there is just so much potential for abuse. And I think that it's falling apart in places where women have more rights for a reason. And this will likely continue as long as women aren't thrust back into domestic slavery. So we can say goodbye to the nuclear family. Andrew asked a minute ago, do you think values are inherent at birth or inferred from the environment? Well, that's an interesting question, Andrew. I mean, I think when we're talking about things like evolution, evolution is a process that is ultimately guided by environmental factors. There's these crazy sort of like environmental feedback loops that occur that result in evolutionary mutations and all this. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily either, or I don't know. I mean, it probably depends on what evolutionary trait we're discussing, whether or not it was inferred from the environment or inherent at birth. But as far as it relates to what I was just saying about morality being something that is at baseline natural, I think that I think that pretty much everything, all of the universal principles of morality that pretty much every culture around the world adheres to, things like do not murder, do not cheat, be kind and pleasant to your neighbors. Don't assault them for any reason. These are universal. Nobody made these up and then the ideas just spread like wildfire. Everyone was like, yeah, these, I would argue, are definitely predicated on natural impulses. Naturally, I think people don't want to be involved in aggressive, violent conflicts. Naturally, people don't want to be murdered or murder others, really. People experience empathy for each other, not even necessarily just feeling bad for them or whatever, but just there's almost this baseline state of I don't know, it feels like some kind of primal respect for your human peer's existence. I don't want to stomp out a human like I will stomp out a mosquito, Though, I don't know, if I was giant and other people were really tiny like mosquitoes, maybe I would naturally want to stomp them out. But we'd probably be a different species at that kind of a scale difference, so it's hard to say. Andrew says, so a utilitarian wouldn't want to break up a whole family because that's more people than the one person who doesn't know they're being cheated on. But somebody could argue, Andrew, that an entire family is being harmed likely by the presence of a cheating member of their family. I don't think that telling somebody the truth, I don't tell people the truth because I know it will lead to poor outcomes for them. If I genuinely thought it would lead to a poor outcome for them, I would probably not tell them. But I tell people the truth, especially in situations like this. I mean, I haven't snitched on any cheaters, though I've been very tempted to, I must say. I would only tell somebody that they were being cheated on precisely because I thought it would greatly benefit them. That's why in the past, when somebody has cheated on their partner in front of me, I have been tempted to tell them not to hurt them, but to help them. I think that this would be true also in the case of a family, What kinds of other troubles arise when you have a member of a family that is treating their partner with the kind of contempt necessary that is necessary if you're going to cheat on them, What other kinds of problems are arising in this family because of this fucked up dynamic? When you're cheating on someone, that is a moral transgression. You're really doing them dirty. How does that influence the rest of the family dynamic? You would arguably be helping the family, depending on the circumstance, by telling them what is happening. I think that's why most people would say something. If they thought it was kind of inconsequential, perhaps they wouldn't say anything. Zensei says, statistically speaking, you need the nuclear family, father and mother in the home ideally, to optimize a healthy mind in the youth and model balance. I think that's anecdotal, Zensei, because we don't really have an example of a world where the nuclear family was not the norm for raising children, except when we consider things like tribal communities, in which case, I think many people would say, well, raising children more as a tribe or as a group of people, I would say that children seem greatly benefited by this model. You know, if the nuclear family did not exist and your kid was more involved in their local community and your neighbors were also a big part of raising your child and their grandparents and blah blah blah, like who's to say that this would not also be very healthy for children? There are societies, I think, where this has happened and it seems just as healthy. I wouldn't say one is more or less healthy for the child in particular, but I mean, I would say actually for female children, it would be better to have a more community-driven approach to parenting because those female children grow up to become women who historically become domestic servants in the nuclear family and economically isolated, and they have to do so much unpaid labor because the brunt of child rearing just happens to fall on women for reasons that are historical and also reasons that I would argue are also natural. We do the breastfeeding, we carry the child to term, blah, 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 So I would argue that there's more reason to believe that exiting the nuclear family would be advantageous for 51% of the human population that is female. So, that's what I have to say. Slugrick says, hello Slugrick, I don't think I've seen you before, welcome. This week's submersible story was an example about how nation states don't actually practice utilitarian ethics. Oh, fascinating. The U.S. spent millions to try to save an individual few, but never works to save refugees also in the ocean. I see what you're saying. So the argument, or what was being talked about on submersible. What's submersible again? I think that sounds familiar. Talking about how a nation like the U.S. claims to have this kind of like humanitarian approach towards like other nations, but really they're spending exorbitant amounts on individual kinds of people instead of like, working to help as many refugees as possible. Is this what you're saying? Zensei says, in what I guess is a response to what I was just talking about, the nuclear family, that's a decent argument, but if you saw how well put together their children were, at least on the exterior, I think that it would be too hard to find droves of people dedicated to raising everyone's children with the utmost passion and care a biological mother and father would. I'm not gonna agree with this one. First of all, I'm just going to be real. I'm not trying to be inflammatory, but I really don't think that most people even really have an experience of both of their parents being very passionate about raising them. It seems to be a very common experience where in the nuclear family, your mother is the one doting on you constantly, providing everything for you, doing everything for you, where the father is kind of largely absent, maybe because he's working or because he's abandoned you entirely, or, so I would argue too, like, that's just not even true, so many people talk about the kinds of fucked up shit that went on in their families, period, fighting, violence, molestation, absent fathers. Like, the nuclear family is absolutely rife with horror. And, I don't think it's appealing for a lot of people, especially women. I think that this is part of why it is falling apart. But just because it's falling apart doesn't mean that the well-being of children and our ability to raise them with virtues and with love is impossible, Interesting. Yeah, this is interesting, this conversation. We're talking about the nuclear family as it relates to the good of the group, I think I'm definitely of the mindset that the nuclear family, or the absolving the nuclear family, would be good for the greater majority of people. Because women are 51% of the population. Now, if women were 30% of the population, I wonder what I would say. Would I say that the nuclear family is good for the greater good because women are the minority? That's something interesting to think about as well. And this is something that I think complicates these discussions immensely too, because when we're talking about like the greater good, for example, how does this relate to populations like the population of the US, which has this entire population of people that in recent history was actually human slaves, like, what about groups of people that are underrepresented in government? How do we dictate what's good for the group when within the group there are subgroups that have drastically different needs? Men and women have drastically different needs, Gay people are a minority. Like, how do we resolve that question? What is good for the group if the group has all of these subgroups with conflicting interests and needs? How shall we approach this, my brothers, my sisters? Slugwreck, in response to what we were just saying. Yup, exactly. Okay. U.S. proclaims itself as a humanitarian country that practices utilitarianism, but it ultimately has a bunch of blood on its hands to protect a protected few. Funny that the U.S. would claim utilitarianism. Is that like a public stance? Do we like literally say that outwardly? Like, we care about the good of the world. I think if we say we care about the good of the group in the US, what we mean is the group of people who are United States citizens. Because ain't no way we've ever demonstrated care for the good of many as it relates to the international community. I mean, what a fucking joke. Zensei says, I think the nuclear family is an ideal that sounds more achievable for success than anything else, though. Personally. Why do you think that? See, I don't think that at all. Because, I mean, well, obviously because I'm a feminazi and I already am just so anti-nuclear family because I see how harmful it is for women, but I'm trying to think, like, what is the benefit of it, period? I mean, for one, too, not just to talk about women, but to talk about children. I think children are so harmed by the nuclear family. I mean, it's so isolating. I'll give myself as an example, and I'm not trying to come from my parents or anything. I think they did their best with me, but I was raised, for example, by crazy Pentecostal Christians that sent me to crazy Christian school. Like, I don't know if you all have seen the documentary Jesus Camp, but that was my fucking life. And my parents really believed in Christ. And so, I don't hold this against them. But like, when I think about the education I received as a small child, the kinds of things I was taught about, like dinosaur bones, like being fake, scientists being wrong, like lots of fucked up shit. I feel like that is a form of child abuse. Like, I was not given the education that a lot of my peers had access to and that I believe all children should have access to, I think that if children should have any kind of right, it should be the right to equal education with their peers. And this is also a problem in the public schooling systems where more underserved poor communities have access to poor quality education than the more wealthier communities, but we don't allow for even discourse about this, children's rights. We across the political spectrum seem to be of the belief that children are essentially property, just like women were once considered property. Whatever you want for your child is what's best. And that's so fucked up. Like, I think about kids who are homeschooled, and I interacted with kids who are homeschooled all the time because I went to church, and a lot of the kids at church were homeschooled. And looking back, I'm like, that is so fucked up. That, like, these kids have no access to their greater community. Like, they don't even get to meet other kids. They're home alone with their parents who get to dictate everything that they do in life, the kind of education they receive, and also what kind of access to and communication with their broader community they can have. Like, that's so fucked up. Like, I mean, it should be no surprise to anybody that the majority of child sexual abuse happens within the home, because the home is the perfect place to shield yourself from being found out. If kids had greater access to their local community, if kids were constantly in communication with their neighbors and had multiple people that were always checking in on their welfare, multiple people, a diversity of people, to interact with them constantly, to expose them to ideas, to ask them how they're doing. I think that things like sexual molestation and abuse, and also things like education inequality, would be greatly improved because kids would have greater access to their community. Like, that it seems like so obvious that children should not be treated as the property of their parents. We treat them like they're fucking pets. Like, oh, my kid is going to fucking be homeschooled and taught that dinosaur bones are fake because that's my kid and I do what I want. Even in all these debates recently about, I don't know, things like puberty blockers and stuff like this, across the political aisle, we have people saying things like, well, that should be up to their parents, and this is the result of bad parenting, and this and this and this. It kind of blows my mind sometimes, where it seems that both sides of the political spectrum agree that children are property. And this should be between you and your parents. Your parents can make the best decision for you and blah, blah, blah. No, they can't. No offense to my parents, but it is wrong that I was taught that dinosaur bones are fake, okay? I'm really upset about this. Now I'm stupid. That's fucked up. Rachel says, I've always wished for more community. Amen. Amen. I mean, it just seems like everything is becoming more and more antisocial. But maybe antisocial attitudes have always been the norm, and there's just new manifestations of it all the time, you know. But, you know, things like interacting with your neighbors seems like increasingly rare, you know. I know a lot of people who don't talk to their neighbors at all, and I'm increasingly becoming that person because all my new neighbors are weird. But I'm somebody who loves to be in contact with my neighbors, generally speaking. But you know, now we all go home and we consider our community, ironically, I'm talking to an internet community as I say this, but we all consider our community like the internet, our Instagram followers, our Instagram friends. Like, the community is what we're seeing online on social media. We go home and we're totally placated with all these technological devices. We come home and stare at them. We stare at them now even when we're in a group of people, a group of real life friends. We take out our phone and sit and stare at our phones instead of conversing with the people who are literally right in front of our faces, our local community. It's the anti-singularity. It's happening. Or maybe it is the singularity. Maybe we're all becoming one person. A giant fucking Pokemon. We're all becoming Mewtwo. Andrew says, that religious upbringing is also my experience. Thankfully, I had access to the internet very early, so I was able to educate myself. I got the internet pretty early, and all I did was, like, watch ISIS beheading videos. You were smarter than me. I was just, like, on, like, Neopets and the Something Awful forums. Because I went to Jesus school. They fucked me up. Zensei says, I don't want to harp on that topic because I'm not a traditionalist, but by default I understand people's desire to return to conservative values because there is no hashed out alternative being raised. Well, I can understand that sentiment, Zensei, too. I mean, I kind of relate to it as well. I feel sometimes a pull towards traditional values, but not like in the conservative way. I'm like, mine is like in like the caveman way or like the ancient Rome way. Like, I'm like, let's just go back to like chopping off somebody's hand if they fucking, well, that's a bad example. Sorry. I mean, I'm into the aesthetic, but that's not good. I don't know, you know. I have a boner for ancient values. I wouldn't say traditional values, though, like the nuclear family or God or religion, anything like that. But, you know, I do have a boner for ancient value systems. And I do think that part of why I kind of cling to these things is because of what you just said also. It's like, well, when you think about alternatives, you know, they do seem more and more impossible. So perhaps it is easier, the path of least resistance, to return to something we already know instead of trying to forge a future in the unknowable. But the reality is, I think, that we are in unprecedented times, period. And there's no changing that reality. We're just going to keep moving further and further into unprecedented times. So now is as good a time as ever as to commit to values that haven't necessarily been proven to work yet, you know. Like anything goes. We are just becoming more, we are going further and further into a future that has no historical precedent. Like we always talk about history repeats itself, and we talk about the fall of empires and all these things. It's like, dude, there's no historical events to really look at when considering the now, in my opinion. Or at least it feels less and less true, you know. I mean, maybe certain things. People always talk about, like, the fall of the American Empire, like we're in the final stages of the American Empire, and that could be true, but it also doesn't feel right to, like, look to, like, ancient Rome as, like, a historical precedent for what's happening now, because the world now is just so unlike the world before, you know. But who knows? I went to Jesus school. I don't know shit about history or economics or anything, so whatever. Looking at the comments. Gotta give props to Buttress for cultivating this community, says Andrew. Well, that makes me feel good. And hey, we have taken it to real life many times. We do take it to real life. And I look forward to the day I get to meet you. And Zensei, who won't leave his fucking house, even though he lives like an hour away from all of us. Zensei. At least we've made our community real, you know. But the irony is not lost on me, how I'm always talking about how the internet is so isolating. Meanwhile, I'm talking to a club of people that exist only because of the internet, you know. But hey, life is absurd. Zensei says, I like the increase in individualism, but I don't know if it's for the best on the macro level. So you like it as in you enjoy it personally, but you don't think that it's necessarily good for the group. I don't want a faux trad wife or to be a typical stoic male provider, so someone needs to figure out what's next. Well, see, it's complicated also because we live in such a corrupt government. Like, me personally, I think that at the end of the day, I am pro-government. Just not any government that's ever existed. Like, I believe in the goal of government. I think that government is a very advantageous thing and also something that will probably naturally occur for as long as we live as a species of beings that has language. Like, I don't think you're ever going to stop people from organizing into governmental entities and societies, so we might as well create the best government possible. But all the governments we have are so far from that ideal that it's really hard to strategize about things like the absolution, is that the word? Absolvement of the nuclear family while living under such a corrupt government. Because, like, my ideal, for example, would be we have a pure and perfect government, a government that is not authoritarian, that is oriented at the good of the group, the good and well-being of the group, including subgroups that have specialized needs. We create this government, and then something like child rearing would ultimately be part of the responsibility of the government. Like, you are procreating and contributing to our population. It is all of our collective duty as members of a governed society to help you in the rearing of this child. And everything we do as a group should benefit you and your children, you know. Like, shit, in my ideal world, we would have an awesome government that really cares for its people. And as soon as you have a kid, you, like, ship it off to fucking baby camp. We start making your kid do push-ups as a toddler. Your kid's doing push-ups. Your kid's learning Chinese. Your kid's learning experimental film developing techniques. Your kid's learning architecture, 10 languages, hella push-ups, gymnastics. Like, your kid is gonna get the fucking regimen. Your kid is gonna be so benefited by our baby military program. That would be awesome. But we don't live in a world like that. So, you know, I can't say right now, oh yeah, I think we should have babies and then ship them off to USA baby camp. USA baby camp would be absolutely horrible. We can't do that. So, it's hard to strategize, I think, at this point in time, too, because everything revolves around, like, having a better hypothetical set of conditions. We just don't have that right now. Zensei says, I think it's good that we can now find community outside of localized regions, but the problem is when we carve out our own echo chambers to reinforce our own ignorance or maladapted ways. But ultimately, the internet is for the better, IMO. There's no going back. Andrew says, death to Jesus camp, long live baby camp. Right. Well, anyway, to try to get back on topic, this wasn't super on topic. I'm out of it, guys. If you can't tell, I've just been so living, breathing, sleeping, video editing. But to try to get back on topic, I don't think I've ever encountered a political philosophy that does not claim itself to be utilitarian. Have you? Like, what is the opposite of utilitarianism? Let's ask Google. Oh, Andrew. In contrast to the utilitarian concept, deontology is ethics of duty, where the morality of an action depends on the nature of the action, i.e., harm is unacceptable irrespective of its consequences. This concept was introduced by Immanuel Kant and hence widely referred to as Kantian deontology. I see. So, okay. I never took any morality or ethics courses in college. I was all just reading like the weirdo Germans. So is what deontology is ultimately determining the morality of an action. Okay, determining the morality of an action by the intentions. Okay, so would somebody who claims true I'm trying to think of like what an example of deontology versus utilitarianism. Like, give us an example. Okay, somebody has given us an example of the trolley problem. Hold on one second. Okay. Specifically, in trolley-type dilemmas, the deontological option is always an inaction, while the utilitarian option always involves active interference. I see. In the footbridge dilemma, for example, the deontological opinion means not interfering, letting the trolley proceed and overrun 5 people, whereas the utilitarian option requires actively pushing a stranger onto the tracks so that his bulk stops the trolley. I mean, this is like the death of Caesar, right? Like, Brutus kills Caesar with the idea that this will be for the good of the group being Rome. But does utilitarianism necessarily dictate that I am out here actively killing people for the good of the group? Because in that circumstance, one could say that anybody who claims utilitarianism is ultimately a liar if they're not going out and like committing acts of revolutionary violence every day, you know? Like, should we all become, is the only way to be a utilitarian to like go out and become Ted Kaczynski and start killing people in the name of saving humanity? I mean, not that he necessarily did that. Well, he did do that, but That's another story. Rest in peace, Ted, by the way. Ted passed away while we were gone. Death of an icon. Kind of sad. Really sad, actually. I'm not usually sad when somebody of his caliber and celebrity and age dies, because I'm like, well, at least we can celebrate that he lived a long, influential life. But I really did feel like a flame of hope was extinguished when Ted died. Very sad. But anyway, I mean, if this is true, that the utilitarian would always... They're talking about the second variation of the trolley experiment, by the way. The second variation... The first variation is everybody tied up on the tracks, the one person versus the 5 people, or 3, no, it's 5. And you either pull the lever and kill the 1 to save the 5, or you don't interfere and the trolley runs over the 5 people and 1 person is spared. In the second variation of the trolley experiment, you are standing on a bridge with a very fat person. The trolley is coming from below. It's underneath this footbridge. The trolley is coming heading towards 5 people. Now you can push the fat person off the bridge and use the bulk of his body to stop the trolley from running into the 5 people, or you cannot interfere with the situation. And essentially, you know, this variation kind of illustrates that the first example of the trolley experiment is really not that much different from the second one. What is ultimately different, and we did a live stream on this once, is kind of the aesthetic presentation of it. Like, when you have a lever right in front of you, it almost feels like it's meant to be pulled or placed in a position, one of 2 positions. That's what levers are for. They're binary switches. It goes between one option or another option, you know? But when it comes to something like killing somebody directly because you think it will help the greater group of people, this paper I just read from claims that the utilitarian option is to push the fat man in front of the trolley. But I would argue that if this is the case, then nobody can truly claim utilitarianism, because, like, you know, I might think that what is good for the great majority of people is that I run into a government building strapped with a mom. Wink. You know, like, but I'm not doing that. So can I claim utilitarianism? One would have to become like a soldier of righteousness and go out killing people all the time and basically declare war left and right, especially nowadays, if you want to truly claim utilitarianism. Is that what's necessary? I don't know if I agree with this random ass abstract. Lady Grinning Soul says, I majored in political philosophy, which was ultimately a mistake. Why do you say that? Oh, you also said Machiavellianism is also technically a political philosophy. There's heaps. Utilitarianism is like the least respected one in philosophy. It's seen as morally bankrupt and childish, but scientists love it, right? Well, what do you think about what I'm saying, Lady Grinning Soul? Is it really... Can somebody really not claim utilitarianism if they're not out here actively, like... committing action in the name of what they think will be some sort of hypothetically good outcome for the group? Or is it like when you're only confronted with a random scenario that you're supposed to rise to the call of duty or whatever? Andrew says, not making a choice is a choice. Andrew says, yeah, a deontologist wouldn't have killed Caesar because murder is against the rules. Well, that's not going to work out. What about in the case of murder in self-defense? I mean, we were just reading about deontology, though, and it did say that a deontologist would apparently accept you murdering a thief, intruding in your home because you're protecting your family. I mean, what happens when this is the same argument with murder and self-defense. You have, like, you kind of have, two potential outcomes. Like, I do nothing and my family dies, or I murder this person even though it's against the rules and my family is spared. Same with murder and self-defense. I do nothing and this person kills me, which is wrong, but at least I won't be committing a wrong in return. Or I kill this person to spare my own life, which is arguably a moral good. you know. Oh, Zensei has just copy-pasted what I saw earlier, exactly. Andrew says, I don't know what virtue ethics would say. I usually think about it as what would Jesus do? Hey, that's the easy way, right? Shit. Andrew says, I'll admit I have a simplistic understanding of these principles. I mean, so do I at the end of the day. I mean, the more you think about anything, the more you realize that anything can be wondered about into like inaction. You know, I mean, I tend to feel as if I ultimately have a utilitarian approach to my political philosophies, in the sense that like what is good will be what is good for the great majority of people, and I believe that there's pretty much no circumstance where you can argue a moral good is something that is not good for all. You know, I can't think of any moral action that benefits only like certain individuals and not everybody. I think that all things that are truly moral and ethical do promote the good of the group, even if it involves something like a group being temporarily disadvantaged. You know, when we were talking before about like how do we talk about things like the rights of minority groups when we're aiming for the greater good, if, you know, like gay people are only like what, like 10% of the population, the greater good, I mean, the great majority of people are heterosexual. So how do we do something like promote the rights of gay people if we're aiming at the greater good and they don't represent the group really, because they're such a small part of the group? I would say that, you know, things that benefit groups, subgroups in the greater group ultimately do benefit us all, even if we feel like we're being disadvantaged in a way. You know, I can't think of any way where beyond like some kind of temporary issues, the group is not ultimately benefited by the rights of all people and all subgroups. Like, you know, to talk about like feminism again, like I think that women getting rights is something that is temporarily disadvantageous to the greater group. Like, I don't know shit about economics, like I said, but from what I can observe, I feel like feminism really did kind of compromise the entire state of Western economics. You know, you have this world where 51% of the population is not in the workforce, and it's just kind of these domestic pregnant slaves. All of a sudden we have birth control and we're making money too. You go from like only 50% of the population having any sort of access to wealth or income, and then now all of a sudden it's like, you know, now we're getting closer to 100%. I don't know where we're at now. I don't know what percent of women have jobs, but you know, it's like this, I think, is it creates compromise to the system, and you know, this can be kind of chaotic, but I would say ultimately even men would be benefited by a world in which women were content, even if they're going to be temporarily disadvantaged. You know, I think there's also a lot of growing pains going on culturally. A lot of men I see are lamenting that they feel as if they have lost their purpose and things like this, you know, but that's because I think that naturally they will find a greater purpose, a purpose predicated on something more true and real, and not something predicated on the idea that they are some kind of like protectors or caretakers of 51% of the population, especially because this entire thing is illusory and not even true, you know. So I think even when we have groups being temporarily disadvantaged, the greater group, you're still, anything that benefits a group of people will benefit the whole. Andrew says, I think being gay is utilitarian. Lady Grinning Soul says, you can talk about what the greater good is for decades. It's about the way you frame it and cut it up, and people have very specific ways to progress those arguments that take so long to be acquainted with. You also said, I honestly think these discussions are way more interesting than the way grad students talk about it because you're not corrupted by those restrictions. Right? Yeah, I mean, I don't have much experience in academic philosophy, but, I did take a handful of courses and know a lot of people in academic philosophy, and yeah, it's pretty grueling stuff. This is way more fun. Nobody can tell us what to do. Andrew says, apparently 2 million women left the workforce in the U.S. during the pandemic because of lack of child care. A totally unfounded statistic, which I have no source for. I read something similar, Andrew, yeah. I think that's very true. You did start a very long-running philosophy club, says Andrew. Yeah, I mean, when I did take academic philosophy courses, I think that, part of what made it so thrilling for me is realizing, oh, I can engage with this content. It's really not that hard to understand, and anybody can engage with it, so I don't know. I think it's fun trying to empower other people to be like, hey, you could talk about this. Just look up this word and learn this. I've met quite a bit of philosophy students in my time, and some of them are the dumbest people I've ever fucking spoken to. Me using bad grammar when talking about how other people are stupid. No, seriously. I've actually been quite disturbed by how stupid some philosophy students I've encountered are. Meanwhile, I talk to people on the street and not on the street. I mean, you're a bunch of street dwellers, and just be like, hey, what do you think about this concept that I'm going to introduce to you right now in simple language? And then we can have a great discussion. And I'm like, wow, you're so smart. We're so smart. Look at us talking about this. Meanwhile, some other guy will be like, well, have you read Kant's blah, 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 and in the Kantian model and blah, blah, blah. It's like, what the fuck are you saying? You're just hiding behind, some sort of credentials you're literally making up on the spot. Oh, I can't engage with that until I've read this and I've become acquainted with that, and Heidegger said and blah blah blah, and this contradicts the Aristotelian blah 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 blah. Shut up. It's like a bunch of it's like academic lawyers. Shut up. I just want to talk. Talking is fun. Can I get an amen? Press 1 if you love to talk. Rachel says, I'm a subway rat. That's so cute. Zensei says, I'll say this. If you can't write, you shouldn't be taking philosophy courses. I mean, yeah. That's true, I suppose. I mean, then again, I don't know. If you can't write? What do you mean? Define writing. Let's get philosophical. What is writing? Hey, I think some philosophers couldn't write. Because Socrates, right? He probably couldn't write. He was too busy being barefoot in the streets, talking his shit. I think anybody could understand Socrates, shit. Let's go. I'm of the mindset that most people are very smart. Most people start from the opposite premise in what I've observed. People say, oh, everybody's so stupid, blah, blah, blah. I think everybody's really fucking smart and has the same capacity to be smart. We're just all speaking different languages, and we're all familiar with different concepts. We all have different histories, but we can all easily meet on the same page, especially the more we standardize approaches to language and to education. This is part of why I believe so passionately about children receiving the same standard of education as their peers, I think all children should have the same exact school curriculum and be taught it with the same kinds of rigor. They should all meet the same standard of education, all these different schools the kids go to, but that's not how it is. It's fucked up. We all possess the same capacity for intelligence. So, we should really standardize our approaches to acquiring it, because that creates more community and more harmony in our community, but the government doesn't want that, do they? They're putting fluoride in the water. They're making the kids gay. Zensei says, I'm talking quantitative, not quality, for writing. We had essays every second. I see what you're saying. So, literally, you should be able to write words on a paper. Yeah, true. Writing is a good activity, I think. Helps you learn how to articulate yourself. Anyway, it's been an hour and 10 minutes. I'm going to get out of here. We usually only go for an hour. Everybody please give the video a thumbs up, even though I don't even know if we really did what we set out to do. Do we have any concluding thoughts? Phenomenology Club has for a long time now been in its era of just like open-ended questions. When I first used to get on here, I used to like give really hard-ass opinions. I'm like, no, this is how it is, and I'm going to tell you why. And that was a fun era. But as I went on, I'm just like, I mean, it really is true. I think the more you go with thinking and philosophy, the more you're just like, man, we could literally do so many things. This is what I was saying earlier. Like, you do ultimately kind of become paralyzed by indecision when you truly confront the infinity of opportunity. Like, when talking about, you know, how should we do this? What would be the best government? What would be the best philosophy? What would be the best language? The possibilities are endless. You start to be like, I don't know. So, you know, a question like, how should we think about government? What is best for the group? What is the good of the group? How do we aim for it? At face value, it seems like something easy to talk about, but as you go on, you're like, oh my God, I don't know. Maybe, like, for example, to go back to the population thing, maybe what would be best for the group is if 99% of us die tomorrow. Maybe that would be good, because how are we defining the group? Is the group the human species? If the group is the human species, then one could argue that, like, a mass extinction event could actually be great for us. Especially in the midst of our technological crisis, where the quality of everything has become completely compromised and we're all drinking plastic water. You know? Driving our cars every day. The possibilities are endless. Anyway, enough about that. Thank you, everybody, for talking. Andrew just says, sorry if you were domineering in chat. No way. Thank you for being such an active participant. I love it. If you guys want to keep talking, hop on into the Discord, and we can talk some more. Even though we're not heavily in our discourse era, perhaps we'll enter another one. I'm right now in my buttress era. I'm going to continue being in my buttress era. I've been absent from making music for like 5 years, and this is the year I decided, like, no, I'm going to make more music because I need to sustain myself. So I'm still in that era, haven't been as discourse heavy, but, you know, I still feel as if Phenomenology Club will likely enter another discourse era at some point. I mean, we're always in a light discourse era, but come on in and try to talk to us, try to discourse, see if anybody bites, but come on in and talk about your day too. Talk about anything you want. We love you, and we're here to talk about anything, and what we're especially here to talk about is it. Can I get an amen? Anyway, I'm going to sign off. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. I love you all. I'll see you in 2 weeks, same time, same place. Well, a different link. I'll post it to the Patreon and the Discord. Until next time, stay healthy, stay happy, and most importantly, stay trippy.